1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, and welcome to the Vininspo podcast with me, Ed Merrison. This is where wine is a travel experience. Join us as we pick up bits and pieces, make new friends, and create memories that make our future interactions with wine, people, and places all the more meaningful and fun. My guest on this week's podcast is Anna Flowerday, one half of the power couple that is Te Whare Ra, or TWR, in Marlborough, New Zealand. Anna was riding high after she and vine whisperer husband Jason were named New Zealand Vigneron of the Year by the Real Review. We talked about the glorious renaissance of McLaren Vale, how passion is more important than you think, being married to the Obi-Wan Kenobi of viticulture, the soft-spoken side of Sauvignon Blanc, having no skeletons in your winemaking closet, being fluent in the international language of Pinot Noir, why awards still matter to much-loved people, the not-so-fine line between cowshit and bullshit, and buying a death trap sight unseen and turning it into one of the country's finest estates while raising two sets of twins. I started by taking Anna back to her Aussie roots.
I grew up just outside of McLaren Vale in a little place called Wollonga, right where the old bike race used to go, actually past my parents' property. One side of the family is a farming background. The other side of the family is a wine growing background. So it's not the traditional patriarchal lineage, which, you know, appropriately for us little girl power family. Mum's side of the family, my family have growing wine since like 1854 or something, I think, in McLaren Vale. I grew up with that on a farm and a vineyard, real outdoorsy kid, fair bit of a tomboy. Originally wanted to be a vet at one stage until I saw a vet trying to turn a calf, you know, up to his shoulder in a freaking cow, and it cracked in his ear at about 1,000,000 miles an hour. I was like, I don't mind getting dirty, but, you know, earful of cow shit, maybe that's pushing it. Yeah, I just loved science at school and was kind of destined to do something in that direction. And yeah, I guess that's the start of kind of how we ended up here.
So growing up in Wollonga, you're obviously close to the beach and in pretty lovely surrounds down there, but also with a lot of vines around and historical vines, as you said. Does that feed into the kind of upbringing / friendships that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people were involved in the wine industry, you know, like Karina Raymond and I, for example, you know, mates all through, went to different primary schools, but played netball against each other and all those kind of things. So yeah, it was definitely infused in it. And more than I realised probably, I just took it for granted that like lots of people we know had vineyards and kind of growing up around it was pretty fun. I think I can maybe claim my first official vintage when I was about 2. Mum's got a picture of me in my grandparents' vineyard picking grapes about that age. Yeah, I've always loved outdoorsy things. I was never probably destined to be an office job or a city person. It's just not my happy place. I like the outdoors. I like the fresh air. I like that you're doing something different every day. I like farming, you know, in general. I really see wine growing as farming. Yeah, and we had quite a cultural mix, I guess, in McLaren Vale then, which I enjoyed the exposure to that. You know, we had some Italian neighbours and stuff, and I used to love hanging out at their house when the nonna was like making tomato passata, or they were like breaking down a pig and, you know, making prosciutto and sausages. So yeah, I guess for me, just the love of life and exploring wine and food just came from that. I loved it. It's hard now because obviously I've lived in New Zealand for this lengthy period. My heart is still very much probably a bit of both. I really miss South Australia. I love where McLaren Vale is at right now. You know, it's just the coolest to see the renaissance that's happened there is so awesome now. You know, all those family companies still kicking on and thriving and doing new things, and the evolution of the plantings there. I mean, as a kid, it was an awesome childhood. It's what we've tried to recreate for our kids, I guess, that kind of free range kids. You know, you could disappear all day with a backpack and an apple and a sandwich and a drink bottle, and your mum just wanted you home at dinner time. Got to be kids, do risky stuff and stupid things and go exploring, and yeah, It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I was talking to Richard Leask a while ago from Hither and Yon about McLaren Vale, and he sort of reminded me just, you know, the geography of that area. It's obviously going through a really good stage at the moment, as you say, but it's in such an interesting little pocket there, so close to Adelaide, so close to the ocean, really hard not to enjoy Mediterranean climate, really, in many ways, but also on the cusp of the Adelaide Hills in the distance and the Fleurieu Peninsula, just a really big open area. It must be quite an imaginative sprawl for a young child to grow up in as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a thing you could explore. I, very fortunately had both sets of grandparents, like one 10 minutes in one direction from us, 10 minutes the other. We used to ride our bikes. You know, my aunt and uncle lived close. We were always tootling around different things. And yeah, I went to primary school with both the Leesks. Richard's younger brother Malcolm was in my class at primary school. Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm so glad to see what's happened, because I think when we left Australia, the Aussie wine industry was going through a really difficult period. You know, people were going bust and grapes weren't getting picked and stuff was really pretty gnarly. And I think we kind of not jumped ship, but we're like, okay, well, you know, if we're going to leave our paid jobs and get in debt up to our freaking eyeballs to have our own place, that's partly why we ended up back in Marlborough. But yeah, it just gives me so much joy to see the place that McLaren Vale is in now, and you know, the freaking amazing ritzy cellar doors, and as you say, it's perfectly positioned because it's kind of like the Yarra is to Melbourne. You know, it's just out of town, super interesting, the beach is really close, the climate's awesome. As I said, foot in both camps still. I still have an Aussie passport, so still have a soft spot for the Vale.
You grew up around vineyards and farming, but it wasn't entirely inevitable that you'd end up in wine. As you said, you wanted to be a vet, and ironically, cowshit has sort of drawn you back in the long run. Tell us a little bit about how you got started then in wine.
Yeah, so like I said, loved science, and that was what I thought. When I left high school, I was like, I don't really know what I want to do, but I kind of know I love science, so I'm just going to head in that general direction and it'll work itself out. So I actually went off to Adelaide Uni to do a normal science degree, and I was doing biochemistry and microbiology as kind of the majors direction I was heading in. And I was working in hospo, as you do when you're a uni student, trying to pay the bills. And I was very fortunate to work with an Adelaide hospo legend, Peter Morelli, who was my manager at the Red Ochre Grill. Some people might remember that, one of the original kind of native ingredients. Yeah, and he just loved wine. And I mean, I'd grown up around it too. I'd obviously been exposed to, you know, my family were wine lovers as well, and obviously wine growers, but I just never thought about doing it as a job. And Pete just showed us such interesting wines, such cool things that I was like, you know, as I said, couldn't imagine myself. I looked at a job at one stage as like a CSIRO internship, like working in a lab for the end of my science degree. And in the end, I made the decision when I was nearly finished that degree to swap into the wine growing degree. Had the inauspicious honour in that my year is the last year of students that actually got to make wine at Roseworthy. So our course was kind of like a little bit at Roseworthy and mostly at Waite. But the Roseworthy winery was an absolute shithole by then. It was falling down around our ears, you know, because they'd invested all the money into the new facility. It was kind of like MacGyver winemaking. That's kind of, I guess, the pathway through the uni bit. Like on the weekends and when you got harvest placements and stuff, I worked at Tintara. Then I got offered a job with them actually before I'd even finished my degree. So I actually don't officially have a degree after 7 years at university because I didn't hand up the last paper because I was like, fuck it, I've got a job. What do I need the piece of paper for? It still drives my mother freaking nuts, I think. So headed off into Hardy's and the rest is history, you know?
And I remember you telling me a while ago about that cohort that you joined at Hardy's all the way through the mentor groups in the hierarchy at the time. There was clearly an awful lot of experience at the top. People who probably went to Roseworthy in the more glory days. Give us a sense of some of the people that you had both as peers and mentors at Hardy's and what kind of things they showed you about this world that you were entering.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt so fortunate. I know a lot of my classmates are pretty jealous because that was like seen as the plum jobs. Like to get an assistant winemaker job with them, you know, at the end of uni was like everyone was really jealous. But yeah, I mean, I am very fortunate for the leadership of that stage of Peter Dawson and Tim James. You know, a lot of people watching pretty closely because they obviously did have a fairly young team from even chiefs of different red and white and down. Panel was group red winemaker then, and Glenn James was group white winemaker. And then Larry Cherubino, Kerry Thompson, Sue Bell, Rob Mann, me, Fran and Tassie, Cynthia. It was a pretty amazing group of people. Like we busted our asses to do the best because we knew we'd been given an amazing opportunity. But Pete's always told me that the way he hired people was on passion and palate. Do you have an absolute passion? And I guess that was really encouraged. You know, we got to try amazing wines. Like I hate to think what the budgets were for our like tech conferences, because they were freaking legendary, some of the stuff we got to try. Ones I'll never get to try in my life. But also his, and I think Tim, both of them shared that philosophy that if you haven't tasted the best, well, how are you going to know what that tastes like to get you there? You know, and a lot of resources thrown at us for the top tier of things like the Eileen Hardy's, and obviously I was there when the Tintara label was brought back to life again. And yeah, I just feel really fortunate. Like as a young winemaker straight out of school, when you think you know everything, and ironically you find out after about 3 minutes that you don't. Some of the old school cellar hands at Tintara, because I knew my family and because I'd actually worked there as a cellar hand before I got a job as an assistant winemaker, they were actually pretty accepting of me. Yeah, I'm hugely fortunate for what we got to see, the fruit we were exposed to, the opportunities that we had. I mean, yeah, you look at those people now, that's the kind of who's who of lots of regions represented there. there, and I think just a really exciting time. It was a lot of people to bounce things off. As I said, I feel very fortunate.
And also, I suppose, a lot of not just talented people, but also people who have been bold in their choices, which you certainly have in yours. So that must be, I guess, something in the water back in those Hardy's days that infected you there. And you were also infected with the Riesling bug quite early. Tell me how that started.
Definitely. Yes, there was. So obviously, McLaren Vale, born and bred. So that's obviously where I started off. And at Tintara for a couple of years, Syrah, Grenache, the other reds and stuff. We were getting Adelaide Hills fruit at that stage and a bit of the other stuff from Yarra and Tassie. And that was a really good grounding for me also to be exposed to some other things that I hadn't seen. My aunt and uncle had a vineyard in the Adelaide Hills. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, got an opportunity after some time at Tintara for a promotion from like assistant winemaker to winemaker. And that opportunity was at Leasingham. So Jason and I were together by that stage. So I was like, got this awesome opportunity. Do you want to come to Clare with me? And he was like, yep, okay. So we shipped ourselves and our Labrador off up there. But yeah, absolutely fell in love with Riesling. As you know, I'm a card-carrying member of the Riesling fan club. I think it's arguably the greatest white wine on the planet. And there's so many reasons why Clare should not be able to make Riesling. If you look at it, it's in hot South Australia, all these kind of things. It's a very unique place, and it's a place very dear to both of us. It's another place we could have easily stayed there and done our own thing. So I was working at Leasingham. Jace was working at Skilligalee and also for Crabtrees and a couple of other little people and looking after some vineyards and stuff. He's a real wheeler dealer, as you know, my husband. And he embarrasses me sometimes because he'll always just walk up and go, oh, have you thought about selling or whatever? And he'd been driving past this vineyard in Watervale quite a lot. And he was like, I reckon we go and ask him, And I was like, babe, it's not on the market. You can't just rock up to someone's property and ask them if it's for sale or if they'd sell to you. And he was like, why not? And I was like, okay. So yeah, we ended up buying this old vineyard in Watervale, which had some Riesling on it and we planted some Syrah, and it was all dry grown. But yeah, Riesling, just fell in love with it there. I just think obviously Clare and then probably the exposure to Team Cellarhand, as we know, Riesling Down Under has a happy home there of every facet. So just being exposed to those wines and various different Riesling conferences and the Riesling challenges and things where it's, you get to meet other makers of Riesling. Yeah, it's a variety I have a huge passion for. I think I especially love it so much because there's no real winemaker tricks in Riesling. You know what I mean? It's such a pure lens of expression of where it comes from. The soil type, the year, all those other things. It's like looking at something through a magnifying glass or a laser. I don't know. I can't describe it. It's one of the things I love about it. It's why I find it eternally fascinating. And, there's so much you can do with it. You can do everything from the driest wine you ever had to the sweetest wine you ever had. It's just, the Riesling bug definitely got both of us big time in Clare.
Now, I have to admit, I didn't actually know that Jace was a bit of a wheeler dealer, and I'm sure there are other things I don't know about Jace that hopefully we'll find out in a minute. But when did you two get together?
Well, it's a funny story. It's actually because of Tim James, mostly because Jason was working over here for Sealax. It's one of the original Dalmatian family wineries. Obviously, it's a brand now owned by Constellation or whoever owns them this week. So he's working in Marlborough for Sealax, and then they got bought out by Nobelos, and so he went to Auckland to go work for Nobelos as a, change a bit of experience and stuff. And then Hardy's obviously bought Nobelos. So then he was like, oh, well, I've done a lot of white wine making. I've obviously grown up in Marlborough, but I really want to learn a bit more about making reds. And he talked to his boss, who's actually an Aussie, again, from that original guard, similar vintage to Tim and Peter, called Darryl Woolley, who was the head winemaker for Nobelos at that stage. And he said, oh, look, I'll have a chat to my mate Tim James, see if we can hook you up with vintage in Australia. So Jason came on as part of the vintage crew in 99 at Tintara. And yeah, I first saw the name and I was like, oh, Flowerday, that's a bit of a, woof, what's that all about? When I saw his name on the list of people starting, and then I was like, yeah, okay, this handsome, strapping, rugby playing, guy likes wine. It's, bit of all right.
Tick, tick, tick.
So yeah, ticked on the boxes. Yeah. Yep. So we met vintage 99 at Hardy's. So yeah, at Tintara.
Right. So aside from being a wheeler dealer and a strapping rugby playing New Zealander, what else does the world need to know about Jason?
It's really nice actually not having him here because I can say nice things about him because I can't say that to his face because, I've got to keep him in his place a little bit sometimes, mate. He's amazing. He's hugely passionate. And I mean, obviously we'll get to that later, but with that recent award for us, New Zealand Vigneron of the Year probably means the most to us of anything ever because that's always what I've described him as. And it's sort of quite unique, I think, in the modern world of wine now because, especially people who've been through university system because you're kind of encouraged to specialise in either winemaking or viticulture. Obviously at big corporates, you're kept very separate. You don't cross over. And yet Jason very much embodies what a vigneron is. You know, he comes from a growing background. He followed his dad around from the age of 4, left school at like 16, 17 to kind of work in their contracting business, has a huge passion for wine growing and a huge knowledge. He's basically like, if there was a Jedi of wine growing, my husband is that. Like, he just, everything he does, every decision he makes, you know, it's so thoughtful, but it's always about thinking the long game, the end game, like what's that going to look like as a wine for us? What's that going to look like then as a wine 5 years down the track? You know, not a lot of people here put in that level of thought. He really is our X factor. Again, it's often me out telling the story because, as you know, he doesn't love big groups of people or whatever. He's happy talking one-on-one. So he's really been a big part, a massive part of our success because of just his passion and care and thoughtfulness. And yeah, I mean, he's obviously very well respected in New Zealand now as a viticulturalist. And it's funny because when people write stories about us, especially people who don't know us, often write up that I'm a winemaker and he's a viticulturalist. But yeah, it's very much not true. I mean, the winemaking is a team effort. You know, he's a straight shooter. He's actually very thoughtful and really cares. And really, you know, we jumped in boots and all. We bought these old vines that everyone said should get pulled out. And he likes proving people wrong, as do I. Both eldest children, both complete type A, both freaking like being the boss. So some of that's been a bit interesting over the years. But yeah, he doesn't get enough credit. He's often, as I said, because he's at home and stuff like that, he doesn't always see people's reaction to the wines at a tasting or something when they're completely wowed and like, you know, I just wish he'd get out there a bit more. But it's just, we've sort of had to divvy it up, and I guess that's been my role a lot. Yeah, like I said, he's comfortable one-on-one or talking to people when they're at the vineyard, but he doesn't love big events or speaking at big things like that. So that kind of falls to me because you can't shut me up. So
yeah, I don't know if I'd heard you refer to him as a Jedi of the vine before I came over to visit. But I remember my sort of memory of Jason is sort of driving around and just the way he'd be looking at vines, a little bit like the way a hunter might be looking at wild animals, a sort of sixth sense at how they moved and how they looked and what they needed. What I mean. It was really quite amazing. Mm-hmm. Some really, really strong instinct and just a real strength of conviction and intuition. It was remarkable.
Yep. No, he is like, literally, we can be driving along the road at like 100 Ks and he'll be like, oh, that vineyard's got a magnesium deficiency. And I'm like, how can you tell that? He's like, I just know, you know, or that's da-da-da. Like I actually half the time I drive now because when I drive with him, he's always freaking looking at vineyards. So I'm like, dude, keep your eyes on the road, you know. He has like spidey senses when it comes to vines or something. He loves it. He reads a lot. He studies a lot. You know, he doesn't read fiction books. He only reads things about soil and viticulture and pruning techniques and wine things. And he's like 3 generations of viticulture in one brain and then a winemaker to boot. So he actually made his first wine when he was 16 in his mum and dad's garage before he was obviously even legally allowed to drink it, which was like, you know, the Chardonnay from the end bays for obviously machine harvest in that stage. With the end assemblies, couldn't pick it. So he like, am I allowed to have that? And he got an old barrel and like he steam cleaned it and then made the Chardonnay in his mum and dad's garage, which was actually pretty freaking good. I don't know if there's any bottles still left in existence, but I have tried it and it was actually really good.
Very impressive. And so, yeah, well, we'll head to New Zealand then. And just starting with that, whereabouts is Jason's family farming then?
Again, both sides of the family, a bit of a different story. So his dad's side of the family come from Nelson, the Flowerday side. Previously were quite involved in the other sorts of farming that happened over there, so berry farms particularly. And then on his mum's side of the family, the roots are actually originally in Marlborough, but like out in the Sounds and stuff. He has Māori ancestry that comes from there and also Pākehā. And actually he's related to the first Pākehā baby born in the South Island. If you want to look it up, it's another interesting sidebar called John Gard. So yeah, that's where his mum's family come from. They have fishermen and used to be whalers and stuff out right at the tip of the Marlborough Sounds. But then they moved, her parents moved to Nelson as well. And they were also involved in berry farming. And her dad, so his maternal grandpa, Noel, who's still around, he was an early viticulturist in Nelson when a lot of the wine industry in Nelson was first kind of kicking off in the 60s and stuff, and was involved in lots of early research for viticulture over there. And they used to grow table grapes and other stuff as well. So yeah, that's sort of, he had that from his granddad. And then his mum and dad moved over here in the early 80s. Because obviously there's a lot of stuff kicking off. And Jason's dad had a bit of a background in surveying actually. But they got involved here very early on sort of involved in establishing vineyards for people and then looking after vineyards for people. They have a big vineyard contracting business and, again, a big kind of vineyard management company. My father-in-law was actually once the national pruning champion of New Zealand, which is, it's a pretty big deal. It's called the Silver Secateurs. So, yep, a bit of a badge of pride there. But yeah, so Jason grew up around, obviously following his dad. He would have been sitting on the back of the tractor, sticking vines in the ground, all that kind of thing. So he really did learn from the ground up, but also that experience from his grandparents. His family all have green thumbs. They're all amazing. Yeah, that's sort of really instilled in him, I think.
So those times when you were weighing up staying in McLaren Vale, Clare Valley, going back to New Zealand, was New Zealand always going to be a Marlborough question, or might it have been somewhere else?
No, I think it was always going to be a Marlborough question. I think I'd been here enough to know, like I'd come here on a Hardy's trip, and I'd also come here with Jason obviously a few times, and I was just captivated. As you know from being here, I mean, it's obviously often Central Otago is kind of seen as the glamour region, but like I reckon we've got it over them, right? Because yes, we've got mountains. We have mountains on 3 sides, very spectacular New Zealandy looking mountains. But we also have this beautiful coastline, the Marlborough Sounds, 20% of New Zealand's coastline is out there. So I knew enough about this place. Obviously, the global reputation for Marlborough, at that stage in the early 2000s, everyone was like, wow, this is the hottest place, ever in the new world. So yeah, it was a real toss-up. But again, it was sort of that phase of like, the world couldn't get enough of New Zealand. Marlborough was so exciting. There's lots of cool things happening over here versus Australia where things were pretty tough and it was a pretty difficult time. So that's sort of what sealed the deal. But also having our own winery was a major thing because we weren't sure exactly. We thought maybe we'll get a vineyard and start a brand or whatever. And then his parents, let us know that they'd heard that Te Whare Ra was on the market, and Jason knew the property quite well. I didn't know it that well, but I knew enough about it to be like, yeah. It's actually a really funny story how we came to buy it because I had been away at Vininspo for Hardy's, and it was just when Constellation had taken over. And the vibe was really changing and I could tell the culture was going to be different. And also the timing was kind of like we'd already been considering it. But literally I flew back into Melbourne and then Jason picked me up and we drove back to Clare like the long way. So did the Grampians and whatever. So basically took a long weekend to kind of come home. And he showed me all this stuff. He's like, oh, Mum and Dad have sent me all this information. Here's the plantings and here's some pictures of the winery. And what do you think? And I was like, yep, let's do it. So literally I agreed to basically move my whole life to Marlborough, buy this old winery without actually physically setting foot on the place. We basically had signed it all up and I actually hadn't even stepped on the property. But obviously, we had Jason's mum and dad there to go and check everything out. And we didn't move back till kind of the end of September. So yeah, we were allowed to take over the vineyard initially and Jason's dad managed the pruning and stuff for us for a couple of months before we actually got back.
What was your feeling when you first set foot on there? I mean, it must have been hugely excited because it was yours, but it wasn't in the best nick ever, was it?
No.
But also, it's got magic, that place. So could you feel that immediately?
Yeah, it just had good bones or good vibes. It's like when you step into a house, and you just know it either has a nice vibe or, you can kind of tell. But it just had something about it. The wines had a really strong reputation in New Zealand because it was obviously one of those original pioneering places. It was quite still well regarded, which we thought was an opportunity. It hadn't gone in that respect too far backwards. But yeah, once we got there, we're like, oh my God, what have we done? We've really bitten off more than we can chew because, the vineyard was really struggling. The winery had been at that stage, the first vintage on site was like 1982. And then we walk in 2003. And it was basically a freaking death trap. Like nothing would have passed a health and safety audit. We were just like, oh my God, this is really like, whoa. Yes, yeah. But I think we had just had so much enthusiasm, so much energy and just like, hell yeah, we're just, we have this vision. It's all the long game. We know we want to take this back to being one of New Zealand's icons, one of the best wineries in Marlborough. Let's do it. So yeah, I think we kind of probably looked at it a bit with rose-colored glasses. I think we didn't anticipate quite how much hard work that was going to be, but it was a lot.
Yeah, so as you say, an existing label and one for the relatively young Marlborough area that had, for Marlborough, a big track record. What kind of wines had been on the market from there? Because there really was a wholesale change in, I suppose, styles and the look of what you started to do when you got there. But what was the sort of heritage in that? How did that sort of take place as your own dream of Te Whare Ra?
Yeah, I guess we looked at it and went, okay, we've got essentially not a clean slate so much, but there's some good bones here that we can work on. Again, it was like, I used the house analogy because it's basically like this beautiful house that you fall in love with, but you're going to have to kind of strip it back and then, rebuild it. And that's, I guess, what we saw. We're like, old vines, cool. The winery needs a lot of work. But yeah, so it's a long history with aromatics, which obviously we've continued on with that. So it was really well known as, especially a sweet wine producer. They used to make Riesling and Gewürz, several styles of both. And also the original owners were very passionate about dessert wines. So some years they'd actually made 4 or 5 different sweet wines, like berry selection, bunch selection. There was Semillon planted as well. So they made them from Riesling and Semillon and Gewürz. There was also some pretty good Chardonnay. There's Old Vine Mendoza. The reds were a bit eclectic. The only reds on the property was a little bit of Merlot that was producing, Pinot vines that weren't really producing yet, and then they had a block of like Bordeaux reds. So needless to say, that was the first thing to go because we're like, you can do a lot of things in the South Island, but there's only really one property that's able to ripen those late ripening things. And and it wasn't, when we taste the wines, we're like, yeah, no, that's going to go. So I guess we've sort of taken that original framework of, especially a very strong reputation for aromatics. Like the Gewürz is probably, that was the original flagship variety for sure. Like Te Whare Ra Gewürz, I think even before we took over and won like every wine show trophy in New Zealand there was to win, lots of stuff internationally as well. It was pretty iconic. So that was probably the flagship at the stage when we took over.
Yeah, and you took those vines, Gewürztraminer vines, they were too good to move on from. Tell us a little bit about what's so exciting about that variety, because you're very fond of it. And I guess that leads us also into another one of your iconic wines, which is Toru. But first of all, varietal Gewürz, what do we need to know about what it's taken you to get that off the ground?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because it was probably the one we were most daunted about, because when we bought the place, we loved Gewürz. We'd drunk quite a lot of it, but neither of us had ever made one. So it was like, oh shit, we've bought this winery with this amazing reputation for Gewürz. What do we do? And I think our preference is probably for sort of drier wines with more purity and elegance. So that was, I guess, where we were sort of leaning. But then when we're tasting the fruit on the vine, it's really weird because at the point where you pick it dry, it has this real flat point of flavour where it has original peak of flavour a little bit before that, but then about where you pick for dry, it just kind of goes into this weird nowhere point for a while. And we're like, oh, I don't know about that. And then we like left it another sort of week, 10 days, and then we're like, oh my God, holy shit, this is amazing. So then we're like, okay, well, we're obviously not going to make dry when we're picking at this potential alcohol, so it's going to have to be medium dry, which they had been in the past, medium to medium dry kind of thing. And mate, oh my God. I mean, yeah, I'm in love with that old patch. I would protect that. Like I'd literally chain myself to those old vines before anything would happen to them. It's just so interesting because a lot of New Zealand Gewürz obviously is that lot of purity and elegance and huge aromatics, but actually often on the palate is a bit jellyfishy and a bit kind of nowheresville. It has this character I call grandma's handbag, which is really weird, but it's just, it smells like old lady things. It smells like musk sticks and like face powder and yeah, like potpourri and stuff. And yeah, our old block has much more of a sort of Alsatian characteristics. It's more like lychees, ginger, lots of spice, lovely fleshiness. We kind of really use the spice from the skins as a replacement, I guess, for acidity because it doesn't have that when you're picking that kind of bricks. But yeah, it's been a real learning for us. Actually, I got some quite good advice from Freddie Blanc, and I don't know if he remembers, but I did ask him some questions, I think, when I saw him at something. And he was like, when you think Gewürz is ready, leave it another week and then it's ready.
Very good. Well, yeah, Freddie Blanc, of course, friend of the podcast and the guest on episode 1, we did talk about Gewürz. And he did mention that generally speaking in Alsace, when people talk about acidity, he said acidity is not a problem of the grape variety, it's an issue of viticulture.
No.
But yeah, he's very fond of his Gewürztraminer still.
Yeah.
And moving on from there to Toru, which I think brings us on to your whole attitude and approach to aromatic white wines. Toru won the distinction of hitting the Fine Wines of New Zealand's classification list, which was a pretty cool thing. Not your only one on there, but also because a lot of that list is, the real classics of what the staples of New Zealand. And for a three-way blend of Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer and Riesling to make it onto a list of classic wines that you need to know, benchmark wines for New Zealand, is kind of cool. So a little bit on that wine and why you are so well placed to really get aromatic, textural white wines of depth and interest.
Thank you, because that reminded me, that was another really proud moment for us, again, because I think when we first made Toru, there was a lot of doubting Thomases around us. Like when we first showed it at other local winemaker things, so like, that's weird. You guys are never going to freaking sell that. That's going to end up being a Cellador only wine. And you were like, oh, okay, cool. Well, obviously we love aromatic whites, and not sure if you've ever heard of Alsatian field blends, but okay. So that was obviously the inspiration. Like, especially we tried originally just the, you know, the Trimbark Gentil, and then the obviously Marcel Dice kind of field blends. And we just thought, what a cool idea. We've got this old vineyard of amazing aromatic varieties. Marlborough's climate so suits aromatic whites. And we just loved the idea of that, of like a wine from our place that was a blend, that wasn't a single varietal. So yeah, I guess Toru was the experiment that worked. It's probably I do joke that obviously, especially having 4 children, I don't have a favourite child. That depends on the day. But I love them all equally. But Toru is definitely probably my favourite wine of our lineup. For all those reasons, because people told us it wasn't going to work. We just made it because we believed in it. We loved it. It was a very personal origins. You know, we sort of set out to make this kind of geeky field blend. And I think it helped making it, having that experience with the varieties individually, because I think it helped us understand what we were trying to do and how we would maybe go about it. I think we sort of thought a lot about it at the start. We had this idea in our head of how we were going to get there or what it was going to taste like, but not necessarily sure how we were going to get there. The first vintage, we made them individually and then blended them. And then the second vintage was the first time we tried co-fermentation. So we co-fermented half and did half, the exact same percentages in the blend, but fermented separately. And we've never gone back. We've always co-fermented ever since. It's just like alchemy. I still don't really understand, you know, obviously nerdy winemaker wise, exactly why it is so different. But obviously everyone else knows, you know, it just does something else when you ferment them together. So they're not interplanted, but they are grown in the same vineyard. Sometimes we have picked them and pressed them together. Other times we basically have found that co-fermentation is so important that if we do have a more stretched out vintage, we'll basically just get the Gewurz and Brie in because they normally come in earlier, cold settle them and then rack them and then hold the juice at like literally 0 degrees so it can't start fermenting. It's got to wait for the Riesling components to come in. And then, and then put the blend together and then ferment them into different parcels. But yeah, I absolutely love Toru. It's just delicious. You know, the longer I've spent in this industry and the more and more time, and if I look now like what my daughters and their friends want to drink, we can't lose sight of that. You can have all the nerdy detail and all the other blah, 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 but wine's main function is to be delicious. That's its job, you know, and it's all the hard work we've put in that you can't see that. But Toru just is this delicious combo of the best of all 3 of those varieties, not the more polarizing aspects. You know, I love tricking people with it because often in Cellador, I'll just give it to people and they're like, oh, what is this? And I'm like, oh, no, you have to try it. And then I'll tell you. And obviously it just says Toru on the front label, nothing on the, you know, nothing about the varieties. And then it's often the people who've spent 5 minutes or 10 minutes telling me in great specific detail how much they hate Gewurz and they hate Riesling, that then are like, oh, I love this. What's in this? And you're like, apparently all that stuff you thought you didn't like. So yeah, it's hugely versatile. It's so interesting. That's probably become our new flagship. I think it's, you know, in nearly every export market where we sell, it's our second biggest selling white wine behind Sauvignon, you know, and if you back to all the people that told us it wasn't going to work. But yeah, I just love how many people love Toru. I love the amazing wine list it's on across the world. I just love how many people have fallen in love with it. It's just, you know, it's a real crowd favorite with our mailing list customers as well. And yeah, I just love that wine.
And this should have been a question maybe that I asked earlier, but we'll sort of divide, I suppose, the magic of TWR a little bit into the Marlborough and a little bit into the Flowerday Power side of things. Because Marlborough itself, I guess partly because of the success it's had with a certain style, which we'll talk about in a minute, it has perhaps been overlooked sometimes that it's been successful because it is a really amazing place to grow fruit. From the wine student point of view, or just the tourist point of view who hasn't gone there but is starting to sort of put together the A, B and C of how a wine region can lend itself to beautiful wines, what has Marlborough got going for it?
Well, yeah, it's a very unique place because obviously we get these hugely long sunshine hours. That's honestly the crucial part relative to the latitude we are. So it's the long sunshine hours without an extreme heat that you might expect, but just like really long daylight hours. Lovely cool nights that retain a lot of natural acidity and purity in the wines. We've got amazingly diverse soil types, which again is like when you're talking about that thing at McLaren Vale at the start, it's an underappreciated thing in Marlborough. People think it's all just big flat plains and it's all this sameness, and it's not at all. Like, you know, we kind of talk about Marlborough now as 3 different subregions. I think you could eventually get to the point where it was 8, to be honest. Yeah, so, but really it's the aspect as well, just the way that the valley, especially the Whare Ra runs. It's got that protection from the south so that we have these big diurnal range is very important, but it's actually the gentleness of how that happens. Because, I mean, it's like obviously Otago has a pretty big diurnal range as well too, but they're more dramatic changes in temperature. But because we have that coast so close to us, that does make a big difference. And I think that's what lends the wines that amazing kind of like punchy fleshiness and all that thing, but there's still lovely acidity. So you kind of got this, because sometimes if you get beautiful acidity, you've also got this edge of, you know, unripeness. But yeah, it sort of has this magical ability. And it always was a place really well known for growing other fruit. And I think that's a bit of a hallmark. Obviously, lots of places where, you know, cherries will grow or apricots will grow or whatever, as wine has followed more in the New World. So yeah, it's a very underappreciated thing. It made this wine style that was so distinctively different than anywhere else in the world. You know, like people just fell in love with it because also it's the most consistent viticultural region in New Zealand, and that helped it grow. So once there was success and once people did fall in love with it, you know, for a cool climate, which obviously are renowned for being ups and downs, Marlborough's quite unique in that aspect, in that we are a cool climate region, but the consistency of our climate year in and year out was what enabled the wines to keep delivering and people to fall in love with them. And then that kind of grew from there. Was, I think, other places it's a bit more stop-start, because one year it delivers this, another year it delivers that. So it's sort of been that trust and that consistency, which, yeah, I mean, a lot of people bag it for that, but it's like, well, hey, if I was going to put my money in somewhere, I'm going to pick somewhere that's, you know, I can't afford a write-off every third year or every fifth year. It's a very special place that I am probably more passionate about Marlborough because I'm not from here, because having been in other places in the world, I so appreciate what is able to be done here. You know, it's very special.
Yeah, and as you said before, I mean, it's very important that wines are delicious to people because that's what you do with them, you drink them, and flavour is something that you're never short of. But as you say, with that brightness, that potential fleshy textural aspect, but also the freshness, it's pretty compelling. And also, as you say, consistency, not a bad thing. And it's not like it's not marginal in its own way. It just happens to have a really good chance at hitting the sweet spot. And no one's saying anything about Margaret River having those natural advantages either.
No.
On another point then, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc itself is something that obviously you are able to sell a lot of. It's the calling card of the region, and something that's, again, we need to know more about that than just a stereotype. So what is it that makes Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc more than just a staple?
It's a bit tall poppy syndrome for Marlborough because, you know, obviously nowhere in the world has become so famous so fast. And that is just all about the ability, you know, to what you can do here. But I think it does require some love to coax the best out of it. And I think it's like when people say, oh, I don't like Marlborough Sav, or I don't like them anymore, I'm like, you obviously just haven't tried the right ones, because there's a lot of people here really throwing everything at it from the vineyard and winemaking side of things, you know, growing really well, very focused on quality, very thoughtful winemaking. They're making wines that have got ageability and longevity, which is in the bottle something not often appreciated. You know, there is an element of the industry here that's literally just obviously more manufacturing and making wines to a formula, and it's made by numbers and it's cranked out in bazillions of litres and whatever. But there's more to Marlborough would be my tagline there, if you like it. Yeah, there's some really wonderful, very thoughtful wines being made here. You know, some people are like, oh, I don't like them anymore. I find the acid really grippy and green and aggressive and a little bit shrill, and they're kind of a bit skinny. And yes, that is showing up in the more commercial end. But it's like saying that, you know, we know very well that all Australian Shiraz is not frickin' 19 Crimes or Nottage Hill. You know what I mean? So Marlborough has that as well. And I think it's been a bit of a maturing of the region. It's like, for me, the next chapter is obviously the sub-regional diversity that I was talking about earlier. I think that's an underappreciated part of it. I mean, to me, if you're going to have Sauvignons on your list, you want to have a good Alwatini style, you want a Whare one, you can have a barrel fermented one. You know, there's a lot of cool stuff happening. You don't just have to list the same. So yeah, it's a variety that I find very interesting, and it's amazing. It literally rewards you in spades if you just give it a little bit of love back. Thoughtfulness, not overcropping, gentle handling, do some cool stuff in the winery. You know, I mean, obviously we make two different styles. The TWR one is the more classic kind of Marlborough style, which is majority tank fermented, and then about sort of 10-15% barrel. No new oak, just all older. And then we do the single vineyard Sauvignon, which is more the opposite way. It's like 90% barrel fermented and just a little bit in stainless for topping. But yeah, I mean, I guess my favourite thing is to put ours up in a blind tasting against the certain Marlborough icon. And be like, oh, which one of those would you pay, you know, this much money for, you know? it still stuns me that they can get that price point, but it's good for the region. Like, a lot of people diss that, but I think it's great for us as a region to have a kind of icon brand like that has that kind of price point, because if people will pay, you know, a lot of people around the world now are paying that amount for that brand. So yeah, it's finding where you are and knowing, I think, being true to what you are as well. I've sort of totally got on a tangent now, mate. You know what I mean? It's like, don't say you're a blah, blah, blah producer when you know that you just do the basics with it. Be true to that and just be like, this is it. This is what we're doing it. It's made to be fresh and easy drinking and gone by freaking Christmas, as opposed to, like I said, there's a group of 10 or 15 producers that are really doing the hard yards, great site selection, really giving it love. And I think those wines are New World icons.
It goes to the wines across the board. Then we talked a little bit about the Gewürzen, the Toru, now the Sauvignon Blanc. But what we haven't mentioned since talking about Jason in the first place is viticulture. For you, farming is what it's all about. And obviously you have been obsessive about growing good fruit. We can't really ignore the fact that this is coming from an organic and biodynamic place. But just put into perspective how important and why the organic and biodynamic principles are for you.
Yeah, I guess for us, the beauty of having this place was we knew that actually we could make more of a difference in the growing than in the making. You know, and I think for both of us, the longer you spend out of winemaker school, the less winemaking you like doing, really. The whole point is if you've got great fruit, then in the winery you don't need to do much, and a gentle hand is all that's needed. So for us, that was the real focus. We wanted to make a difference by focusing a huge amount of effort and meticulous detail on the growing side of things. We were very interested in organics and BD when we were in Australia. Jason kind of went along to one of the early Biodynamic Association things, the first wine thing that I think there ever was, back then when we were still in South Australia. And we used to run our own vineyard that we had in Vale biodynamically. That was really quite stark because, you know, that was a couple of really dry seasons and you're looking at going, ours looks amazing, you know, really healthy vines, and yet you've got vines nearby that have got a lot more irrigation or whatever that are really struggling. Hot tip for you here, Ed, there's a new Te Whare Ra t-shirt coming. Wait for it. But it does, new mantra, which goes along with our other one, is don't treat soil like dirt. And that is the foundation of everything we've tried to do. Like, it was the way to bring the old vineyard back to life, was to create this healthy soil, you know, full of organic matter. Jason is a curator of microbiological goodness. It's so important. And I think the other thing that kind of made us feel like that was a really important tool to get us to where we wanted to be with the brand and the wines and all those kind of things was we kept trying wines from other parts of the world. And it might have been 2 Burgundies or 2 German Rieslings or 2 Italian wines. Like, they'd be from the same place, like literal neighbours or something. And you'd taste one, you'd be like, holy shit, what is about that one that's different? Like, it's got this X factor. There's something about it that's just so much more interesting and entrancing. And there's just, you know, and we were finding that time and time again, you research and that producer was organic or biodynamic. So we were like, if we want to make wines with real X factor that really speak of the place that they come from, then that's a really important tool to get us there. But then when we saw the state of the vineyard and we were like, these old vines need basically the vineyard equivalent of CPR to kind of bring it back to life again, that was just something we were like, well, that's the way we're going to do it. So yeah, it's become part of who we are. Obviously the famous, you know, cowshit, not bullshit. You know, it's all those things. We spend so much more time worrying about what's going on underneath the ground that you can't see, rather than the top part that's a really obvious part that everyone else, you know, runs around and get people driving around their ute looking at how their vines look. It's like, mate, just get out and walk through there, get a shovel and look at the soil and see what's happening. And again, that's where Jason's massive achievements there and true to his vision of what he's done. It's made our winemaking very easy to have fruit of that quality. You know, when you can stand on the sorting table and like time in and year out, I actually question why we even have a sorting table, because it's just like looking at nice fruit going past. I mean, if anything, it's just nice for him after the end of a freaking hard, tough growing season. You know, lots of long hours and all the hard work he's put in. It's almost more of a little mini celebration for Jason to see these like beautiful bunches going past, because often we're there like with the vintage stuff and they're like, so what should I be taking out? And I'm like, leaves. If you see any bugs, take them out. You think sorting tables are for removing other things, and there's often, especially in the last few vintages, we've had these lovely growing seasons and no weather pressure or anything. You're just looking at the bunches and you're just like, we can speed it up. It can go a bit faster because there's nothing to pick out. That's really a key part of it for us. And actually, we feel like that's made a big difference in getting us to where we are now, is having that control over 90% of what we make, we grow as well.
The mantra, wines made with cowshit, not bullshit, obviously goes down to the importance of the soil and the farming, but also it's a little bit of a dig, I suppose, as well, to being true, which you've obviously been to yourselves, into your place. As you say, Jason's often in the background or in the vineyard or chasing other vineyards that he can't take his eyes off. But you're the one who tends to be able to get out there and talk to people. How do you feel we're going as a wine culture in terms of helping people understand the ideas of sort of authenticity and clarity, the intricacies and the beauty of wine? What could we do better?
Wow, Ed, that's like a freaking hour conversation, mate, just there. It's getting there. And to be honest, I think that generational change is driving that, because I find younger drinkers are much more interested in the cool shit like that, and they'll call you out as well. You know, like, I welcome all of that because I know that we walk the walk. We're not just talking the talk. And that was obviously what that was about. You know, there was, especially in the early 2000s and stuff like that, when it's sort of more talk about sustainability came in and these kind of things. There's a lot of what I see as kind of greenwashing, and the wine industry likes storytelling, right? That can easily morph into complete fucking bullshit. You'd be standing at trade days or something like that, and you'd hear this person be like, oh yes, and we blah, 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 pretty much organic, and you'd be like, fuck off, mate. You know what I mean? Like, why say that if you're not? You know, I guess, like I said, we're both call a spade people. We're both straight shooters. That's my coolest thing I find about younger drinkers. They're really interested in that. In your, you know, your business ethics, do you look after your people well? They ask some gnarly questions. You know, I guess that's my favorite thing again about being on social media is, you know, just having those conversations with people, because I know that there's no skeletons in our closet. We know that we're looking after our little bit of New Zealand the best way we can, that we're farming well, we're farming for the future, we are, looking after our people. Obviously, there's some conversations right now in the early stages about whether ingredients labelling will come in for wine. And for New Zealand and Australia, that will happen at the same time because we have the Joint Food Standards Code Authority. I would, again, welcome that because I think it will get past a lot of bullshit. You know, if it's written on the back label, like, you can turn it around and see what the ingredients are. As, for example, would say organic grapes, yeast, minimal sulfites, might drop, as opposed to something that's got, blah, 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 this, and added tannin and thing, I did this, and I added that, and I, you know, like, you know what I mean? It just gets past all the bullshit. It's another reason why we decided to get certified, because we felt like that was also making us answerable to a known standard. And it was getting past the being able to bullshit your way through things of just being like, well, you know, we're certified organic to the international standard. This is what that means. If anyone wants to know, here's the list, you know. Yeah, it's kind of, it was a subtle dig at that part of, you know, that kind of element that we saw creeping in. Yeah, it's something we're pretty passionate about. And as I welcome that, I see like now with our older girls who are, you know, both 20, about to turn 21 this year, they are really thoughtful about the brands of things that they'll buy. They research really well about what's in them and how the companies make them and where do they source things from, and bring it on.
Yeah, I think I mentioned, I think it was you who drew my attention to the motif from the Regenerative Organic Alliance, farm like the world depends on it. And I think as well that that's another pretty clever two-way mantra, really, because obviously in many cases we are talking about the nature, the world around us when we talk about farming, but also perhaps these conversations, as you say, talking to consumers as well about wine, that idea of situating wine within nature and within the world and within the future, and all of our ideas of sustainability and in fact cultural values. Wine, rather than being something that should be potentially pilloried as a product, as it is in some quarters, especially the sort of health lobby at the moment, has a real chance of actually making people aware of the world around them and the choices that we make. And that obviously goes to also perhaps being sociable and not being lonely and being part of the world around us too. And I think that farm like the world depends upon it idea sort of brings that sort of thing together. And again, as a communicator and as a maker of wine, as a grower of wine, you're probably aware too of that possibility of just making the world a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with all those things. I did a radio interview with here in New Zealand earlier in the week, and I was talking about that, and I was like, actually, I feel like wine needs to separate itself from the greater liquor industry. You know what I mean? Because it's quite a different product. You know, it's very different than, yes, beer you could argue is equally natural, but beer makers are taking something else from different places and doing their own spin on it. Whereas, wine is a farmed, grown, made product. It's not made I guess it's in a can now, but it's not made on a canning line. It's not made with industrial alcohol. Obviously there's, a lot of pressure coming in general and a lot of scaremongering about alcohol and consumption and things like that. I love what you said. Like, I think wine is about connection, and it's about all of those things, and it brings people together. It's about how you have it, what kind of occasions you have it. It's generally in a sociable setting. It's all of those kind of things. So no, I agree with everything that you said there. That's a pretty multifaceted thing. It's like farming for climate change, and we're all aware of that. But yeah, we're looking after our place and our people. It's just always felt like a very welcoming industry to me, and that's what I've loved about it. I have always tried to, even in our cellar door and stuff, like, make people feel comfortable, make them feel totally at ease. They can know nothing and feel totally comfortable. We've all been in those tasting rooms where you feel very, people are like, oh, this might be a stupid question, but I love those. I'm like, no, this is the whole point. While we have little small groups, no one feels daunted. It's like, I just love those questions. It's like, I love talking to people about it and demystifying it for them and just making them feel empowered about it. And then you don't have to know everything. No one does. Like, you could keep learning about wine till you're 90. There's obviously certain people who think they're freaking experts, but it's a great industry. There's so much connection with people in the industry. It's a great way of connecting with people you've never met before. It's all those things you talked about.
You love Pinot Noir, and I feel like you need an opportunity to talk about why and your approach to that. But perhaps also linking that in with I think it's the Southern Pinot Noir Workshop that it's called in New Zealand. I know that you love as well exchanging ideas. You like hanging out with intelligent people, of which there are many in the New Zealand wine scene and in the global wine scene. And I guess in that scenario, you talked about Riesling Down Under, but essentially that feels like a brains trust / family, as does the global Pinot Noir community. And you're involved in a lot of that stuff. You, I think, were on the committee of the latest celebration that occurred in New Zealand. So if you could wrap it into one sort of idea, I guess, the importance of Pinot Noir in your life, but also the importance of learning about wine growing, wine making, wine consumption through a vehicle like Pinot Noir.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I think for most winemakers, that'd be in their top couple of varieties. Like, even mates of mine who don't make Pinot would probably still say it's one of their favourite grapes, because arguably it's like some of the similar things I was talking about Riesling. This real expression of a place, a true lens. It's such an interesting variety because you can't grow it everywhere. It's obviously, we know it's very fickle, it's temperamental. It's a very humbling, great variety as a winemaker to make. But yeah, it's all about connection. So obviously, yes, I was on the board of Pinot NZ just recently in February in Christchurch, which was freaking amazing, and cup filling and all those things. We had speakers from all over the world. Yeah, and I mean, even here in Marlborough, we had a thing. It's now morphed into something different, but it was like Pinot Boot Camp, because it was a hope of local winemakers at an old school camping ground up the road, no cell phone coverage. It came off the Southern Pinot Workshop, which is held in Hamnell for makers from all over New Zealand, which a lot of us have attended in the past, and they often bring in someone to speak about things to learn from, as well as people bring trial wines, and you can show them in a closed setting. There's no media or trade present, and you can just be really honest and, I'm having this issue, or I've tried this and I think it works. Like, what do you guys think? We were involved in setting up a Marlborough version of that. God, I don't even know how long ago now, maybe 15 years ago, because we also felt like, as Marlborough Pinot was in a funny place back then and didn't really know what it wanted to be, and we're like, well, we don't actually learn that much. Like, there's not a magic recipe for making Pinot. I think a lot of people go to work at somewhere in Burgundy and come back and be like, oh, I've got all the answers now. Here we go. But it's like, mate, if you're not making Pinot in Burgundy, that's not going to work. That's what's made me understand about it. I think you have to learn. It makes you really listen to the place. And if you're truly trying to make great Pinot, that's what you're trying to reflect, is that place. So you can't take a recipe and apply that. It doesn't work like that. So that's, this Marlborough Pinot Bootcamp thing was all about that. Was like trying to learn and understand Marlborough better for the people actually making Pinot here. But yeah, it's that great connection that, like, wine's like a universal language is the other thing I love about it. You can meet people from all over the world and you have this variety in common. So it's like you have a language in common, even if you don't, We've been really fortunate to meet some pretty special people through those connections. So
yeah, and I love how those conferences seem to have drawn a lot of proper lateral thinking about your approach to something, where, you're not looking for a specific outcome. It's just, what are all the intelligent things and even faintly poetic things that you can throw into a melting pot, and where does that get you in your approach to your work and how you share it with people? It's a pretty cool approach to anything. On another front, we are not really going to talk about Syrah, but I think it was a family tradition that you picked together with the girls. And the last time I interviewed you, I found out, because I looked it up, was October 2014 when they were 7 and 10. As you said, that means as two pairs of twins now coming up to an 18th and a 21st. That family unit is obviously really important for the values that you have at TWR. It must be a pretty extraordinary thing as well, sort of the way that you envisage TWR as a growing project too. Difficult to balance, I'd imagine, for the way that you and Jace have worked your butts off over the last, well, your entire career really, but especially since buying the vineyard 22 years ago. How have you managed to do it all?
Yeah, team effort on both sides, on both aspects. And we became pretty good at multitasking. And obviously the girls have been, quite involved, school holidays and things like that. Be like, guess what we're doing? Exciting, no family trip, but you can come and, do harvest with us or whatever. Yeah, it's been amazing. I think I'm very glad we did it this way because we didn't obviously know two sets of twins was in our future, and a corporate winemaking job and that would have been pretty difficult. There's been times when one has taken priority over the other or vice versa. Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what the kids' perspective is on that, but it's been really lovely to try and, as much as possible, focused on family while still being able to do what we wanted to do. And it was one of the other reasons why we, converted to organic too, was it was like our kids' backyard. For the first 17 years we lived on the property, and that changes how you think about farming when you know that your kids are going to be playing out there in it. Yeah, they've become a big part of the story, and they probably know more about wine than your average 17 or 20-year-old. One helped us out last year for harvest because she was having a gap year, and then another one this year, and we've let them make their own wine. It's going to be for there, because actually in September this year, we have the very significant 21st and 18th birthdays. So one of the girls has made a wine this year that'll be for that, which is pretty cool. Let them have their own little batch of rosé. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if our kids will choose this life, and they don't have to. There's no pressure. We've always said that. Our girls have definitely seen it from the rose-coloured glasses off. They've seen the stress, the long hours, the endless, grind, the hard shit, all that stuff. And I feel like it's, if they do choose it, they'll be choosing it coming from a perspective of really knowing what they're getting themselves into, which I think we did too, because we, as I said, both grown up with it. We'd seen the ups and downs and the roller coasters and whatever. We knew that if we, chose this industry, we're pretty pragmatic about it. So, but yeah, I think they're really proud of what we've done. I think that's really cool now to see that they, they really get it and understand why we were doing things that way and whatever. But it hasn't been easy, mate. If it's like, yeah, one of those things would have been hard work, let alone doing them both. But then you're in. You've just got to keep on freaking swimming because you can't stop and you can't, so you just have to make it work.
Well, as I said, that conversation took place sort of halfway through the lifespan of TWR to date. And one of the things you said was everything we do is about being the best, not the biggest, not the loudest. It's a long game we're playing, and I think we're taking Te Whare Ra to a good place. And I'd say you have done exactly that, but also just this past week, you've been named Vignerons of the Year. That really is a culmination of a tremendous amount of hard work, and also, I'm sure, makes a big difference as well to a small business. Just tell us a little bit about how that made you feel and how that validation works, but also like how important the recognition of hard work is when you really believe in what you're making.
Yeah, it absolutely was, mate. There was a few tears, there was a few everything. It was a real lovely vindication, because you win things elsewhere. You win a trophy for something, or it's won wine. I think a lot of people look at it and go, oh, it's the international recognition that means so much, because then you're up against, the best from elsewhere. But like, it's not really. This homegrown one from people that really, that judging panel for this really have a very deep understanding of New Zealand wine in every facet. So yeah, we were humbled to even be a finalist, let alone to have won. It means more than I can say. It means the world. It was everything we set out to do. Like I said, we bought this old little winery that had originally been a real icon of Marlborough. We wanted to make some of the best wine in Marlborough, but equally we wanted to stand alongside, Felton Road, Artarangi, Tamata, Neudorf, those kind of iconic, small, high-end producers that had been there for the long game. So yeah, to have got there with this and the rankings this year and everything, it means... I can't even say, as I said, especially after the last 5 years with, surviving the C word and all that kind of stuff. And at times wondered if you would, because, we lost everything overnight, like so many other people. It means even more now. There's been a few key points along the way where we've had significant recognition or awards and stuff like that. But yeah, this one just means the most of any of them, I think.
I was talking to Christina Pickard on the podcast, who's now covering New Zealand as her beat and sort of pointing out just how, for such a small producer, New Zealand has some absolutely stellar, true believers making truly distinctive wines. And you've never ceased pumping up the tyres of other people as well. So the other thing I think that is really cool is to see you get a little bit of that back at you.
Yeah, no, thanks, mate. It was lovely. We've had the loveliest messages. I mean, I haven't even had a chance to reply to them all, from people we have immense respect for. That means so much too. Because Jason hasn't even seen them all because he's not really on any social media. So I'm actually in the process of like screenshotting stuff and putting it in him for like a little bit of, you know, a few pages he can sit down at night, or when he's had a hard day and be like, read this, remind you this is why. When trying to do what we're trying to do, you don't necessarily make wines that everyone's going to love, you know, but you want people that really know wine are going to like them and are going to appreciate them. Yeah, as I said, the respect of people for the way that we've carried ourselves, what we've tried to do and how we've tried to farm. It's all wrapped up into that. Yeah, there was a few tears shed. Happy tears, but yeah, it was pretty emotional.
That's it for this week's podcast. If you enjoyed listening to it, please like, subscribe and share with everyone. Seriously, it makes a big difference. You can also subscribe to my Substack, that's edmarison.substack.com. Feel free to leave a comment too, I'd love to know what you'd like to hear more of. But for now, I'd like to say thank you to Lucas James for the music, Neil Williams for the artwork, Elizabeth Clancy for the edit, and to my guest, Anna Flowerday. Till next time, live wine to the fullest. Cheers.